Is that all? How humans make aliens regret their threats, a HFY story. The galaxy is a vast and varied place, home to species of unimaginable power, intelligence, and cruelty. From the towering, four-armed Bezek to the serpentine Tlak, many have learned to fear the wrath of the Charl Dominion, the oldest and most ruthless empire in the known universe. Their fleets are endless, their armies terrifying, and their reputation precedes them. So, when the Charl warship Scorched Maw appeared above the peaceful human colony of Castor 9, the inhabitants didn't panic. They braced. They were, after all, human. The Charl commander, Xrael, knew what his kind was capable of. He'd encountered dozens of species, each more pathetic than the last, each cowering before his might. He had crushed entire civilizations beneath his heel, and there was no reason to believe that these primitive humans would be any different. I am Xrael, commander of the Charl fleet. His voice echoed over the calms, cold and menacing. You have been given a choice: surrender your colony and submit to the Dominion, or face annihilation. You have 30 minutes to comply. On the surface of Castor 9, the human leaders gathered in their command center, observing the massive warship hanging above them. General Marissa Drake, a decorated veteran, was calm. She had seen this kind of thing before, not with the Charl, but with other races that had underestimated humanity. Do they think we're afraid of them? She muttered, staring at the alien craft. Her second-in-command, Lieutenant Taylor, raised an eyebrow. They must. They're practically begging for a fight. General Drake nodded slowly. Give them what they want. Meanwhile, on the bridge of the Scorched Maw, Xrael stood before a console, his many eyes fixed on the human colony below. The 30-minute timer was counting down, and the silence was palpable. It was rare to see such calm in the face of impending doom, but he had seen the same defiance in countless species before, just before they were wiped out. What do you think they'll do, sir? His tactical officer, a slim, hissing creature with translucent skin, asked. Xrael turned, his mandibles twitching in a grotesque approximation of a smile. What can they do? They will send their meager military to die, just like all the others. After that, they will beg for mercy. It is always the same. Back on Castor 9, Drake had gathered the top engineers and military strategists. They weren't planning a counteroffensive. No, that would be foolish. Instead, they were going to give the Charl exactly what they wanted, only with a twist. We don't have the firepower to match them head-to-head, said Dr. Fiona Calloway, the colony's chief engineer. But we can make them regret coming here. General Drake grinned. Exactly. It's time to show them that humans don't just fight to survive, we fight to win. With just minutes left on the timer, Xrael's impatience began to grow. Prepare to deploy the strike force, he ordered, feeling certain the humans were trembling in fear below. As his officers scrambled to follow orders, Xrael flicked a switch to initiate the attack. Just then, the comms crackled to life. Commander Xrael, came the human voice, cool and unbothered. This is General Marissa Drake of Castor 9. Before you begin your assault, I suggest you take a moment to appreciate our message. Xrael's mandibles twitched in irritation. What message, human? A signal appeared on the screen, a large, fiery symbol with human letters written across it. Is that all? Xrael's alien eyes narrowed in confusion. He had encountered dozens of species, but none had ever dared to mock him so directly. What is this? A joke? No joke, Drake's voice responded, her calmness only making the situation more unnerving. Just a reminder of who you're dealing with. Suddenly, the entire Charl fleet shook, not in the way that a hit would cause, but in a more profound, unnerving way. The vibrations seemed to come from all around them, like the very fabric of space was humming with energy. The Scorched Maw's engines began to flicker. Report, Xrael barked, but the console before him was going haywire. Strange signals, unfamiliar frequencies, and entire systems began to shut down. The Charl ship, once a machine of destruction, felt as fragile as an insect's wings. On Castor 9, General Drake's grin deepened. Activate the pulse. With a single command, a hidden array of human technology, modified from old, abandoned Earth satellite tech, fired up. It wasn't a weapon in the traditional sense. It was an electromagnetic pulse, but unlike any the Charl had encountered before. It wasn't just designed to disable electronics. It was tuned specifically to destabilize energy-based systems, throwing advanced alien technology into disarray. For the first time in centuries, the Charles warship was powerless. Systems shorted out, weapons failed, engines sputtered. The mighty ship, once a symbol of fear across galaxies, now drifted like a broken husk in the void. Xrael stood frozen, unable to comprehend what was happening. His fleet was in chaos, all his weapons, his shields, his sensors, everything rendered useless by a primitive species' ingenuity. He turned back to his tactical officer, who was frantically working the damaged consoles. How is this possible? How can they disrupt our technology? The officer looked up in a daze. We don't know, sir. It's like our systems are being devoured by an invisible force. General Drake's voice crackled through the comms again. We've only just begun, Commander. Now, if you don't mind, we'll be sending you a little reminder of who's in charge here. Castor 9 out. Xrael, his once certain confidence shattered, fumbled to issue an order, but there was nothing left to command. His fleet, his ship, his entire military might was incapacitated. A species they had assumed would simply bend and break under pressure had done the unthinkable. They had turned the tables with a combination of resourcefulness, courage, and an unexpected mastery of the very things the Charles had considered their own domain. And just when Xrael thought it couldn't get worse, the comms beeped again. This time, a human ship, small but well-armed, emerged from the shadow of Castor 9. It was headed straight for the scorched maw. Shall we prepare to engage, Commander? One of the Charles officers asked. Xrael's mandibles clicked once. No, do not engage. Let them come. He knew it was over. For the first time in his long, brutal career, the Charles had met a species that didn't cower, that didn't submit. And worse yet, the humans weren't even trying to defeat him directly. They had simply outsmarted him. As the small human ship came closer, General Drake's voice came over the comms once again. Is that all you've got, Commander? Because, frankly, I was expecting more. Xrael's gaze, cold and hard as stone, met the view of the approaching human vessel, and for the first time, he knew fear. Is that all? How humans make aliens regret their threats, Part 2. The human ship, a sleek and unassuming vessel called Resolute, drifted toward the crippled Charles flagship like a predator closing in on its prey. To an untrained observer, it would have appeared insignificant, but Xrael wasn't a fool. He knew better than to underestimate anything, especially when it came to humans. The Resolute was small, no more than a freighter by military standards, but General Drake's reputation was now legendary. She had pulled off the impossible before, leading her people through desperate battles with enemies far more advanced, and Resolute had come out of it unscathed. He knew, deep down, that this ship and its crew were capable of things the Charles could not even comprehend. Prepare the defensive grid, Xrael snapped, his mind racing. We cannot let that ship close the distance. If they think they can challenge us now, they are sorely mistaken. The remaining functional weapons on the scorched maw began to hum, charging up to fire. Yet, as Xrael's officers frantically attempted to bring their weapons online, the Resolute continued its slow, deliberate approach. General Drake's voice came over the comms again, ice-cold and casual. Commander Xrael, I think you're still missing the point. The moment you chose to threaten us, you made a mistake, and we humans were not known for forgiving mistakes. Xrael's mandibles clicked again, though this time it wasn't out of confidence. The chill in her voice unsettled him more than any weapon ever could, but he had his pride, and no matter the situation, he was a Charles. They didn't back down. Do you think you can scare me with empty words, human? Xrael's voice was laced with venom. You've crippled our ship. Yes, but it will only be a matter of time before we recover. You're only delaying the inevitable. Is that so? Came the response. Softer now. Let's see how long the inevitable takes to arrive. In that moment, Xrael's attention snapped to the Resolute's course. His sensors, still erratic from the earlier electromagnetic pulse, began to recalibrate. What he saw made his mandibles quiver with both confusion and dawning horror. The human ship wasn't heading toward the scorched maw to engage. It was moving toward one of the Charles' secondary command vessels, an older, more vulnerable cruiser on the outer perimeter of the fleet. The Resolute wasn't aiming to destroy the mighty warship. No, it was targeting something far more valuable. All units, divert all remaining power to shield arrays, Xrael ordered. Do not let that ship get any closer. But it was too late. A low hum filled the Charles warship, and the very space around them seemed to bend and distort. The Resolute released a concentrated energy burst, a pinpoint laser of incredible precision, right into the heart of the cruiser's command core. The light from the burst was so intense it lit up the surrounding dark void for a brief moment. On board the scorched maw, Xrael watched in stunned disbelief as the cruiser disintegrated into a cloud of debris. Its engines obliterated and its systems fried in a matter of seconds. The explosion wasn't a fiery, dramatic event. No, it was clean, efficient, and utterly devastating. The kind of destruction only a species that had truly mastered technology and understood the art of warfare could deliver. Xrael's tactical officer stood frozen, staring at the now empty space where the cruiser had been. "We have lost the cruiser, sir, and there are more ships coming into range." Drake's voice cut through the comms again, this time warmer, almost as if she were speaking to a pet that had failed a simple task. "We humans don't play by the same rules you're used to, Commander. We don't just point and shoot. We think, we plan, and most importantly, we adapt." Xrael's rage flared. He had underestimated them. That much was clear. But what really twisted the knife in his gut was the realization that humans had not even engaged him directly. They hadn't thrown themselves into the fight head-on. Instead, they had taken out a crucial piece of his fleet, a piece he hadn't even considered valuable enough to protect, and done it with a single, simple shot. "You think this is a victory?" Xrael hissed, fury distorting his voice. "You've only delayed the inevitable. We will rebuild. The Charles will crush your colony, your fleet, and every last one of you." "Rebuild? After a precision strike like that?" Drake's voice came again, now tinged with quiet amusement. "We'll see how long it takes you to rebuild anything when we've taken out your supply lines. And you can't rebuild what you don't have." Xrael's eyes flared with fury. "You dare to threaten me again, do you think?" But then it hit him. The sudden silence from his fleet. The deep, unnerving realization that nothing was working as it should. Communications were down. Internal systems were malfunctioning. And most importantly, his fleet's strategic position was compromised. The EMP pulse had been bad enough. But now, it was clear the humans had a much deeper understanding of Charles' vulnerabilities. The Charles Empire had always prided itself on its invulnerability. Their fleets had been designed to fight and conquer without consideration for anything less than absolute power. Yet here, now, before them, stood a species, humanity, that had shown them not only that their might was no longer enough, but that their arrogance had blinded them to a truth they were now learning in the most painful way possible. Xrael clenched his mandibles, trying to maintain control, but the sight of his fleet in disarray, the smug, unhurried tone of Drake's voice, was more than he could handle. For the first time in centuries, Xrael felt something stir within him, something he had never allowed himself to feel: doubt. Before he could issue another command, a new transmission broke through the chaos. It was from General Drake. But this time, it wasn't a taunt. It was a simple message, straightforward and final. "We'll be waiting for your surrender, Commander. You're out of time." Xrael's mind raced. The Resolute wasn't a threat to be defeated with raw power. It wasn't even about fighting. It was about outlasting. The human fleet, their tactics, and their ability to adapt were slowly, inexorably suffocating him. They were not interested in playing by the rules of war. They had rewritten the book entirely. In the dark silence of space, with his fleet's systems still in disarray and his pride in tatters, Xrael finally understood: humanity had already won. With a final, hesitant breath, he issued the command, knowing it was his only remaining option. "Send a message to Castor 9. We surrender." And so, for the first time in history, a Charles fleet bowed to the unlikeliest of victors, humanity. But General Marissa Drake's voice, calm and filled with quiet satisfaction, was already echoing in Xrael's mind. "Is that all? Is that all? How humans make aliens regret their threats, Part 3. The surrender of the Charles fleet to the humans on Castor 9 was not just a victory, it was a statement to the galaxy. The Charles Dominion, once feared by countless species for their absolute power, had been forced to acknowledge a simple truth: humanity A species they had considered nothing more than a blip in the cosmic hierarchy, had outsmarted them, outplayed them, and ultimately broken them. HFY, broken and humiliated, was still aboard the scorched maw when the human message came through. The Charles commander had no choice but to accept the terms for surrender. His pride had shattered in ways no physical weapon could. The message from General Marissa Drake was as direct as it was symbolic. This is your final chance, Commander. Surrender all remaining vessels and return your fleet to human-controlled space, or we will begin deactivating every system you have, one by one. For a brief, surreal moment, HFY had to fight the overwhelming urge to laugh, not at the threat, they were more than capable of carrying it out, but at the absurdity of the situation. His fleet, his empire, was brought to its knees not by superior firepower or overwhelming numbers, but by the ingenuity and tenacity of humans, the same humans he had intended to enslave. His decision was made, but the moment still felt unreal. The once feared Charles had been reduced to nothing more than a shell of its former self, a broken remnant of its once mighty power. General Drake stood in her command center, her arms folded across her chest as she observed the data streaming in from the scorched maw. Around her, the officers were still processing the enormity of what had just happened. Lieutenant Taylor, her second in command, could hardly contain his astonishment. General, this is, I never thought I'd see the day. The Charles, surrendering? To us? Drake gave a single, small nod. Her expression was calm, almost serene. It's not just the Charles, Taylor. It's the whole galaxy. We've shown them all what happens when you underestimate humanity. She turned her gaze to the tactical map, where the Charles fleet now hung, motionless and docile, like cattle awaiting slaughter. But Drake didn't have the heart for slaughter. Not today, anyway. This victory, this moment, was more than enough. Dr. Fiona Calloway, the colony's chief engineer, looked up from her console. I've been analyzing the damage to their systems. General, they're not just deactivated. They're disassembled. We've got several hundred Charles warships and cruisers dead in space. And our tech is still pulling apart their core components at an alarming rate. They're basically stuck. General Drake smiled, a rare expression of satisfaction on her face. Good. Let them sit there for a while. I want them to feel the weight of their defeat. The humans weren't the only ones watching. Across the galaxy, the Charles' humiliating defeat was being broadcast, whether the Dominion liked it or not. Other species, once too afraid to raise a hand against the Empire, now saw the truth. If humans could do this to the Charles, what could they do to anyone? In the darker corners of the galaxy, in the secretive enclaves of the Bezek, the Tlak, and countless others, conversations began to stir. Rebellions were whispered about in hushed tones. Charles officials, once smug and untouchable, now found themselves facing the uncertain future of an empire teetering on the brink of collapse. Even the Charles themselves, with their infallible belief in their superiority, were forced to confront an uncomfortable reality. Humanity wasn't just another species in the food chain. Humanity had ascended. A few days later, the humans had completed their first wave of reparations with the Charles. The ships they had taken in their deactivated state were carefully studied, dissected, and reverse-engineered by Dr. Calloway and her team. They didn't need to capture everything. The message had already been sent. Still, they couldn't pass up the opportunity to study the technology that had once been the cutting edge of galactic warfare. In the grand conference room of Castor 9's main base, General Drake addressed her staff and a group of high-ranking representatives from several allied races. The room was filled with both the shock of their collective triumph and the weight of the responsibilities ahead. We've shown the galaxy that the Charles are not invincible, Drake began, her voice steady, but we've also learned something crucial. It's not about being the strongest. It's about outthinking our enemies, about understanding them better than they understand themselves. What we did to the Charles, it wasn't about firepower. It was about tactics. It was about understanding how to turn their strengths into their weaknesses. She paused for a moment, her gaze sweeping across the room. And now, we have the chance to prove that we're more than just survivors. We are the future. The room fell silent as her words hung in the air, each representative considering the profound shift in power that was taking place. The Charles Dominion had always been a symbol of absolute might, a force whose shadow loomed over the galaxy. But now, Humanity had become the new standard. For the first time, other species were looking to humans, not as prey or subjugates, but as partners, or, in some cases, competitors. Whatever the future held, it was clear that humanity would no longer be seen as the weak link in the galaxy. Back aboard the Scorched Maw, Xrael sat alone in his private quarters. His once mighty fleet was now a collection of surrendered ships, stripped of their weapons and systems. His empire, once so vast and powerful, was crumbling before him. He had sent a message to the Sharl High Command, requesting immediate reinforcements, but he knew in his heart it would be futile. The tide had turned. For the first time, he thought back on his journey, his conquests, and the thousands of worlds he had ravaged. Never once had he encountered a species like humanity. Never once had he faced an enemy that refused to bend or break. An enemy that fought, not just to survive, but to thrive, to grow. And that thought gnawed at him. He had been wrong. The Sharl were not the apex of the galaxy. Humanity was. The weight of that realization settled over Xrael like a stone, and he knew deep down that the Sharl would never be the same. Their empire would either adapt to this new reality or fall apart under the weight of their own pride. A quiet voice from his comm system broke the stillness. It was a message from General Drake. She had been clear in her initial terms. The Sharl would return to human-controlled space. The galaxy would move forward under the new order. And the message she had just sent was simple, blunt, and final. This is the new order, Commander. Is that all? Xrael let out a long, slow breath. He knew that the Sharl had reached the end of their reign, but as he sat there in silence, for the first time in his life, Xrael didn't wonder what was next for his species. He wondered instead what humanity would do next. And for the first time, he understood what it meant to be truly outclassed. Is that all? How humans make aliens regret their threats, Part 4. The galaxy had always been a place of complex power dynamics, shifting alliances, and occasional bloodshed. For millennia, the Sharl Dominion had stood as the apex predator, their fleets ruling over countless worlds with ruthless efficiency. They crushed rebellions, annihilated species that stood in their way, and made sure their empire's iron grip remained unchallenged. But now, everything had changed. The Scorched Maw and the rest of the Sharl fleet were still stranded in the void above Castor 9, their systems slowly recovering, but the damage done was irreparable. Their surrender had not been a strategic retreat. It had been the ultimate recognition of their own inferiority to humanity. It was not just that they had lost a battle, it was that they had been thoroughly outplayed by a species they had thought to conquer. Xrael, now a prisoner aboard his own warship, found himself haunted by the same question that plagued every other Sharl commander. How could we have been so blind? Back on Castor 9. General Marissa Drake was reviewing the terms of the Sharl surrender agreement with representatives from the Galactic Council. The mood in the room was tense, but there was an undercurrent of excitement. Humanity had just achieved what no one had thought possible, defeating the Sharl, and with it, shifting the balance of power in the galaxy. "It's strange, isn't it?" said Lieutenant Taylor, her second-in-command. "Just a few months ago, the Sharl were the biggest threat we could imagine. Now, they're handing over their ships and begging for mercy." Drake looked up from the holographic display, her gaze thoughtful. "It's not just about the Sharl. It's about what we showed the galaxy. For centuries, empires have ruled through fear. They believed power was the only language worth speaking. But humanity speaks another language, one of resilience, intelligence, and the will to never back down." Taylor nodded, but the unease in his voice remained. "But what happens when the other species see us as a threat? You know there are those who'll want to test us, right?" Drake's eyes flickered toward the viewport, where the Sharl warships floated like broken shells, their once imposing presence reduced to a symbol of surrender. She took a deep breath, a steady calmness settling over her. "Let them come," she said softly. "Let them see what happens when they underestimate humanity." While the humans reveled in their newfound position, the rest of the galaxy had begun to stir. The Sharl, once the unchallenged rulers of the known universe, had been toppled by a species they had barely regarded as worthy. This sent ripples through the galactic community, some good, others ominous. On the fringe of the galaxy, far from the center of power, the Bezek, a highly intelligent, insectoid species known for their brutal efficiency, were having their own discussions. The news of the Charles' defeat was enough to provoke action among them. Their vast knowledge of war and tactics made them formidable opponents, and they had long eyed the humans with both curiosity and disdain. "I told you this would happen," hissed Zaldar, the leader of the Bezek War Council, his 6 legs clacking nervously against the stone floor. "Humanity is unpredictable. They have methods we don't understand. If we're to survive, we must act now." His second-in-command, a tall Bezek named Zakzor, tilted his head. "You believe they would engage us? They have barely made it out of the Charles' shadow. We would crush them easily." Zaldar's mandibles clicked in frustration. "That is exactly why we should be concerned. They've taken down the Charles, a power that none of us have dared to challenge, and they did it with ingenuity, not sheer force. This is a species we should not ignore." On the other side of the galaxy, in the heart of the Tlak Empire, the same concerns were echoed. The Tlak, a serpentine species with a rigid caste system and a reputation for cunning intelligence, had long been rivals to the Charles. Their feud with the Dominion had been ancient, though never as pronounced as their rivalry with the Bezek. "We have ignored humanity for too long," hissed Zyricon, a high-ranking Tlak strategist, as she paced around the command room. Her long, coiling body moved with a deliberate grace. "They've shown the Charles what it means to be outwitted, but their victory was no accident. We need to prepare for the future." Her advisor, Cyrex, a smaller but more agile Tlak, nodded. "The Bezek are already making moves. If we wait too long, they will take the initiative. The humans will think we're all weak and slow to respond." Zyricon's cold, calculating gaze turned to the stars beyond. "No, we must strike first, before the humans realize how dangerous we are. We will not let them repeat their victory with us." Despite the whispers of war, humanity had not yet fully realized the consequences of their victory. The victory over the Charles had come so quickly, so decisively, that the true ramifications were only beginning to take shape. While General Drake and her crew celebrated their success, the galaxy was now a far more dangerous place. The Bezek and Tlak were no longer content to simply observe from the sidelines. They would test humanity. They would learn what it took to defeat them. A few weeks after the surrender of the Charles fleet, a new, smaller enemy ship arrived in orbit over Castor 9. It was a Bezek warship, sleek and deadly, and its arrival sent an immediate shockwave through human defense networks. "General, we've detected an incoming Bezek vessel. It's not responding to our hails," Lieutenant Taylor reported from the command center. Drake's face tightened as she turned toward the screen, which displayed the silhouette of the enemy ship. She knew the Bezek were smart, and their reputation for brutality was well earned. But what they didn't understand, what none of the galaxy's empires seemed to understand, was that humans weren't just survivors. They were conquerors in their own right, though not through brute force. "Send a message," she ordered. "Let them know we're not the Charles." On the Bezek ship, Zaldar's mandibles clicked anxiously as he watched the communication come through. The message was simple, but to the Bezek, it was unsettling. "Is that all you've got?" Zaldar's eyes narrowed. He had heard of humanity's ability to play mind games, but this was something different. This was not a declaration of war. This was a challenge, a dare. He hesitated. "Contact the Tlak. It seems we will not be the only ones testing humanity's resolve." Across the stars, word spread quickly. The Tlak were preparing, the Bezek were testing, and the Charles were licking their wounds, plotting how to regain their dominance. The once secure galaxy had suddenly become a powder keg, with humanity at its center. But one thing was clear, humanity wasn't just sitting back. General Drake's message was not just a challenge to the Bezek, it was a warning to the galaxy at large. Humans weren't here to take part in the old power struggles. They were here to rewrite the rules. The question was no longer if humanity would change the galaxy, it was how they would do it, and whether anyone, Bezek, Tlak, or Charles, could ever stop them. As the tension in the galaxy mounted, Drake stood at the forefront, her expression unyielding. "Let them come," she muttered, the faintest glint of a smile crossing her face. "We'll show them what it means to challenge humanity." And with that, the next phase of humanity's rise began, not with war, but with a single question. Is that all? Is that all? How Humans Make Aliens Regret Their Threats, Part 5. The Bezek warship lingered above Castor 9, and for the first time, General Marissa Drake felt a spark of something unfamiliar. It wasn't fear. Fear had never been a part of her psyche. Instead, it was a profound awareness, an understanding that the game had changed. Humanity, once on the fringes of the galaxy, had now become the center of an escalating conflict. The Bezek's arrival was a clear signal. The galaxy's old powers were nervous. They had seen what humanity had done to the Sharl, and now, they wanted to test the truth of that victory. "General, they're not responding to our communications," Lieutenant Taylor said, his fingers dancing across the console. "They're holding position. It's like they're waiting for something." Drake's eyes narrowed as she scanned the data. "They're calculating," she muttered. "They think they're the predators now, and we're the prey." Her team was ready. Humanity had adapted, and they had learned quickly. The Sharl's defeat had been a lesson, one that the Bezek and Tlak were soon to learn. But General Drake was not about to underestimate them. The Bezek were shrewd, and they would want to test human resolve, just as the Sharl had. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers," Drake ordered. "We won't play by their rules. Let's see what they're really made of." Aboard the Bezek warship, Zaldar paced nervously. He had always been a tactician, a strategist, someone who believed in the power of knowledge and foresight. Yet, now, the human challenge felt different. The message they had sent, "Is that all?" wasn't a mere taunt. It was a declaration of defiance, a dare. The Bezek had always seen themselves as the galaxy's true master of warfare, calculating, ruthless, and precise. Yet, here was a species they had never truly considered, humans, defying them so openly, so brazenly. "Commander Zaldar," said his second-in-command, Zak Zor, her voice measured but full of tension. "Should we respond aggressively? A show of force might cow them into submission. Our weapons are more advanced than theirs. Surely, they know that." Zaldar's many eyes narrowed as he studied the holographic map. "Perhaps, but humans are unpredictable. They don't follow the patterns we expect. I've seen their military engagements against the Sharl. They may not have the firepower, but they have something more dangerous: ingenuity. The Sharl made a mistake when they underestimated them." He paused, letting the weight of the moment settle over him. "No, we won't attack. Not yet. Let's see if they respond to a demonstration of power first. Let's see if they react to intimidation. If they back down, then we can strike. If they stand firm." He clicked his mandibles slowly. "Then we'll need a new plan." Back on Castor 9, Drake was reading between the lines. The Bezek weren't sending a fleet to attack. They were probing, testing. She could almost hear Zaldar's mind at work. The Bezek, like the Sharl, were stuck in their old ways, believing that brute force and intimidation were all that mattered. But humanity had already proven that there was more to war than just firepower. "Initiate the countermeasures," Drake ordered. "Let's put on a show of our own." As the human fleet powered up their defenses, the Bezek ship finally made its move. The warship slowly accelerated, approaching Castor 9 in a straight line. But its intent was clear: it wasn't an attack. It was a demonstration of force. The ship's weapons powered up, emitting a harsh hum. And then, without warning, one of the Bezek ship's massive plasma cannons fired. The shot was not aimed directly at Castor 9, but it was close enough to send a message. A surge of energy blasted through the void, a visual show of raw destructive power. The shockwave sent ripples through space. For a moment, it looked like the Bezek might be preparing for an all-out assault. But as the plasma blast dissipated, something unexpected happened. The Resolute was already in motion. The human ship, though not as massive or imposing as the Bezek warship, moved with precise elegance. The Resolute's shield system flickered, humming with energy as it projected a perfect counterpulse to the Bezek's shot. A high-powered EMP burst radiated outward, short-circuiting the Bezek warship's sensors and sending a jolt through its systems. The Bezek ship, for a moment, was blind. The crew on board the Resolute didn't wait for the Bezek to regain their bearings. They acted quickly. Small, maneuverable strike crafts detached from the human ship, weaving through space with pinpoint accuracy. They fired bursts of energy at the Bezek ship's weak points, focusing on the engines and communication arrays. It wasn't an all-out assault. It wasn't the kind of war the Bezek had waged, where they would crush everything in their path. It was an act of calculated precision, a reminder that while the Bezek may have brute strength, humanity had the ability to strike where it counted. The Bezek ship's systems flickered, struggling to regain control as the human strike craft retreated to the safety of the Resolute. Inside the Bezek warship, Zaldar was seething. His crew scrambled to restore the ship's systems. But he knew that this wasn't a random act. It was a response. The humans had shown them that they didn't fear them. Worse, they had shown the Bezek that they were the ones who needed to fear the humans. Prepare for the next move, Zaldar hissed, his voice trembling with barely contained rage. We won't make the same mistake twice. This time, we strike first. Back on Castor 9, General Drake stood in the command center, watching the data pour in from the Resolute's sensors. The Bezek had been momentarily disabled, but she knew this wasn't the end. The Bezek would regroup, adapt, and eventually come at them again. But they had just learned something important. Humanity didn't respond to intimidation. They responded with action. We're not going to wait for them to come back at us, Drake said, turning to her officers. We're going to keep them off balance. They want a fight? Fine. Let's show them how humans fight. Elsewhere in the galaxy, the Tlak Empire was watching the unfolding events with quiet intensity. The Bezek had failed in their first test against humanity, and now, their own position was under scrutiny. Zircon, the Tlak strategist, stood before a massive holographic display of the galaxy, tracing the shifting alliances and potential threats. The Bezek were already regrouping, preparing to make their next move against the humans, but the Tlak had their own plans. Humanity is dangerous, Zircon muttered to herself, her slithering form casting a long shadow on the wall. But they are also predictable. They will always react. They cannot resist the urge to strike back. Cyrex, her advisor, stepped forward. What do you suggest, Zircon? Do we prepare for battle? Zircon's eyes narrowed. No, we wait. We learn. Humanity is still an unknown quantity, but we will find their weakness, and when we do, we will strike. For the moment, humanity stood on the edge of something monumental. The Bezek had tested them and failed, but the true challenge was only just beginning. The Tlak, the Bezek, the Sharl, none of them had realized what was happening yet. None of them knew that humanity wasn't just playing the game. They were changing it. And for the first time, the galaxy was looking at a species that wasn't just fighting for survival. Humanity was fighting to redefine what it meant to be powerful. Is that all? Drake's voice echoed through the halls of the Resolute, as she stood at the helm of a new, uncharted era for humanity. This wasn't just about surviving anymore. This was about taking what was rightfully theirs. And the galaxy, it seemed, was about to learn that humans didn't just win wars. They changed the rules. Is that all? How humans make aliens regret their threats, Part 6. The Bezek fleet was still reeling from their failed probe, but they weren't alone. The Tlak, watching from the shadows, had begun to stir as well. Across the galaxy, something was building, a quiet tension that reverberated through the corridors of power, whispered among diplomats, and exchanged in secret war councils. Humanity had become the central focus, not just for their actions against the Sharl, but for how they had reacted to the Bezek's challenge. The momentary test had exposed something crucial about the human spirit. They didn't fight to win battles. They fought to reshape the very nature of the war itself. On the bridge of the Resolute, General Marissa Drake stood before a tactical display, her eyes scanning the data streams. The Bezek had limped away, their ships now regrouping on the far side of the system, likely preparing for a new strike. It had been an impressive display of human military power, but Drake knew this was only the beginning. The Bezek would not be so easily deterred, and the Tlak would soon join the fray. After all, when one empire senses a shift in the galaxy's balance of power, others inevitably follow. General, Lieutenant Taylor said, his voice carrying a note of concern. We've just received a message from the Tlak. They're requesting a meeting. Drake raised an eyebrow. A meeting? With us? Yes, ma'am. They say it's urgent. They're willing to send an envoy to Castor 9 for negotiations. Drake's fingers hovered over the holographic interface for a moment. Considering her options, she could refuse, let the Tlak stew in their own uncertainties. But she knew that would only escalate matters. No, if they wanted a meeting, she would give them one. Let them see that humanity wasn't afraid of their games. Set up the meeting, she said, her voice resolute. I'll be there in person. We'll see just how urgent this is. The Tlak ship When the Tlak envoy arrived, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The sleek, sinuous Tlak vessel docked at Castor 9's main station. It was a stark contrast to the massive warships that had once dominated the galaxy, no more brutal show of force, but a reminder that even in the quietest of moments, the Tlak were always calculating, always watching. Zircon, the Tlak strategist, had arrived in person, flanked by her aides. She was a creature of elegance and precision, her body a twisting coil of muscle and scale. Her sharp, unblinking gaze took in everything as she was escorted through the corridors of Castor 9. General Drake, along with her top officers, stood waiting in the sleek, minimalist conference room. The atmosphere was heavy with anticipation. The stakes had never been higher, but as Zircon entered, it became clear that the Tlak weren't here to negotiate in the traditional sense. They weren't here to make demands. They were here to size up humanity, to determine if they were worthy adversaries or something far more dangerous. Zircon's voice was soft, almost musical, as she spoke. General Drake, it is unexpected to find humanity standing as the equal of empires like the Sharl, the Bezek, and the Tlak. We had not expected this to happen so soon. Drake leaned forward, her eyes steady, betraying no hint of hesitation. The galaxy changes. Those who adapt survive. Those who don't, die. Zircon hissed softly, a sound that could have been a laugh or a challenge. A bold statement. You are aware, of course, that we, the Tlak, have witnessed the rise and fall of countless species. We have studied every war, every tactic, and we have mastered the art of victory. We have no intention of losing to you. Drake smiled slightly. Then why are you here, Zircon? If you truly believe that, why not simply attack? Why waste time talking? Zircon's eyes gleamed. We are not like the Bezek, General. We do not rush into battle without understanding our enemy first. We have watched you. We have learned about your species, your resilience, your capacity to turn weakness into strength. Her voice dropped, becoming more contemplative. It intrigues us. It concerns us. Good, Drake replied. You should be concerned. The Tlak's offer. The tension in the room thickened as Zircon unfolded her proposal. You, humans, have proven you can outfight the Sharl, and even defeat the Bezek's first strike. Zircon continued, her tone now serious. But that does not mean you are invulnerable. You will soon find that your enemies will stop underestimating you. The Bezek will return. The Sharl will regroup, and others may follow. We, the Tlak, propose an alliance, not for peace, but for mutual protection. If we join forces, we can share intelligence, resources, and technology. In return, we expect you to respect our sovereignty and stop interfering in the territories we control. Drake listened carefully, her expression unreadable. She had known this was coming. The Tlak weren't interested in negotiating terms of surrender or peace. They were testing humanity to see if they could be manipulated, co-opted, or neutralized before they became a real threat. I appreciate the offer, Drake said slowly, her voice calm but firm. But you're making a grave mistake if you think that humanity will submit to anyone. We are not interested in becoming a pawn in your game. You've watched us, and you've learned. But what you haven't learned is this. We do not bow to threats or promises. We stand on our own. Zircon's eyes flashed, her coils shifting slightly. So you refuse our offer? We refuse to be anyone's subordinate, Drake replied. If you want peace, let's talk. If you want war, bring it. But know this, you will not control humanity. We've outsmarted the Sharl. We've already done the impossible. If you want to test us, be prepared for what comes next. Zircon's expression darkened. She remained silent for a long moment, the weight of Drake's words settling heavily in the room. Finally, she spoke. You humans are reckless, but perhaps that is the very thing that will make you dangerous. Drake stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. Then we are agreed. Let's see just how dangerous we can be. The Tlak response. The Tlak warship returned to its space, and the message was quickly transmitted to the Tlak High Command. Zircon reported the meeting's outcome, her voice tinged with both irritation and curiosity. They refuse our offer, she said, her coils writhing in the darkness of her personal quarters. Humanity will not submit to anything but their own rule. Then we will make them submit. The voice of her superior, Lord Krwzar, came over the calm. cold and commanding. We will strike before they are fully prepared. The galaxy must learn its place. If humanity will not join us, they will fall before us. Zircon, despite her earlier dismay, felt a flicker of something else, something dangerous. And if they do not fall, my lord? If they survive, KRYZthar's voice answered grimly, then we will know what we are truly dealing with. Either way, we must act quickly. There is no room for indecision. A new era of war. With the Tlak's offer rejected and their true intentions now clear, the stage was set for the next chapter in the galaxy's evolving conflict. The Bezaik, no longer content to cower in the shadows, were preparing for a second assault. The Tlak, undeterred by their rejection, were already planning their own strike, with the full knowledge that humanity would not bow to their pressure. But General Drake was already thinking ahead. She knew that this wouldn't be a simple war. This was the beginning of something much larger, a reshaping of the galaxy itself. Humanity was not simply playing the game anymore. They were changing the rules. As Drake stood in her war room, watching the stars twinkle beyond Castor 9, she had only one thought in mind.